Good evening. Welcome to Authors and Dessert in Duluth. Thank you all for coming out tonight. My name is Merwin Chambers. I'm treasurer of the Friends of the Gwinnett County Public Library. If you're not a member, we'd encourage you to join. Funds we raise at the silent auction and the dues help support events like this one in the future. The author's books are for sale and signing, thanks to our independent bookseller partner, Eagle Eye Bookshop. We thank Eagle Eye for their support of the library and encourage you to support them. Tonight's silent auction, as I said, benefits the Friends of the Library. The money does go back to the library in the form of supporting events such as this one. I encourage you to bid. I'd rather not have these things continue to live in my living room. The winner of the door prize, the winners of the silent auction will be announced at the close of the program. And the winner of the door prize sponsored by the library will also be announced at the end of this evening's program. This program is being filmed. It can be viewed on the library's YouTube channel in a few weeks. And here's our first train of the night. You pause for a minute. Okay, they say they're still hearing me, so you may hear more trains, and you will hear announcements starting around 7:30 about the library closing. It does not affect us, so you don't have to rush out. Our moderator tonight for tonight's program is Kalinda Shalaba. Kalinda is a 6-time Emmy Award-winning writer, producer, and content creator. As a broadcast coordinator with GCPS TV, she is a storyteller at heart and loves to shine the light on others. Kalinda is active in the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, Women in Cable Television, Leadership Gwinnett, and is a PBS NewsHour Student Reporting Labs Connected Educator. Our first author, Alayne Smith, had a successful career in education before breaking into the literary world. She was elected Teacher of the Year, Bell South Teacher of the Year, and was the CNN Student Bureau Advisor. Alayne spent the last 5 years of her career in education training other teachers in media specialists and teachers in video production and broadcast journalism. A Mystery Solved, a Prediction Fulfilled is her new book. Piper Huguley is the author of the Home to Milford College and the Migrations of the Heart series. She's a multiple-time Golden Heart finalist. Piper blogs about the history behind her novels on her website. Her book is, by her own design, The Incredible Untold Story of Anne Lowe. Next is Kimberly Brock. She's an award-winning author of The Lost Book of Eleanor Dare and The River Witch. She is the founder of Tinderbox Writers Workshop and has served as a guest lecturer for many regional and national writing workshops, including the Pat Conroy Literary Center. Kimberly's a former actor and special needs instructor. She lives near Atlanta with her husband and 3 children. Please join me in welcoming Kalinda, Alayne, Piper, and Kimberly.
Thank you for that lovely introduction of all of us. And thank you all for coming out this evening. I know we're about 10 days from Christmas, so you either are really good at shopping and are all done, or you're excited to meet these authors like I am. I'm looking forward to this. So for us to get started, why don't we go ahead and have you each tell us a little bit about the book that you've written that we're going to be discussing tonight.
Okay. A Mystery Solved, a Prediction Fulfilled is the 3rd book in a series about an aspiring broadcast journalist named Ellen Jones. Ellen lives in a small town where an old soothsayer lives, and when the babies are born, even the educated, learned parents go to old Luella to get predictions about their babies' lives. So those three predictions about Ellen Jones' life have followed Ellen through my third novel about Ellen. This is the first one that is a true mystery. So it's been interesting to write this. Ellen has an Aunt Essie, and Aunt Essie's very excited because in the mint julep cabinet, do you know what that is? Okay, it's a very ornate antique piece of furniture with a marble top, and it holds, is it bourbon or whiskey, and mint julep cups to make mint juleps. It's a mint julep cabinet. And in the back of this cabinet is a carving stating that Ellen's great-grandmother married one man in 1866. But the family Bible says she married another man in 1866. So this is the problem that Ellen and her aunt are going to solve as they discover her grandmother.
By Her Own Design is what we call a biographical, historical fiction novel about Anne Lowe, who is most famously known as the designer for Jacqueline Bouvier's wedding dress when she married John F. Kennedy in 1953. It is her most famous creation. It was not her only creation. She designed for Roosevelt's, DuPont's, Vanderbilt's, and Marjorie Merriweather Post, as well as the Post fortune. And it's all about her climb to designing for wealthy women of the social register from small town Clayton, Alabama in 1889 when she was 1898 when she was born. It was her birthday yesterday, so still. Yes. So that is what By Her Design is all about.
I hate doing panels like this because you listen and I can't even remember what my book's about. I'm thinking about their books. The Lost Book of Eleanor Dare is a historical fiction, but it's really sort of speculative historical fiction because it's based on the mystery of the lost colony of Roanoke, which is an unsolved mystery, oldest American mystery. And then a little strange piece of Georgia history that connects our state to that mystery. In the 1940s, this series of stones that were inscribed were found, and they're at Brenau University now. And they tell a story about what might have happened to the daughter of the governor of the colony, Eleanor Dare. And I went and I saw that stone about, I don't know, my kids were like in diapers and now they're graduating college, so it's been a long time ago. And they were debunked by a reporter from the Saturday Evening Post who came and looked at them in the 40s, but they're at Brenau. And when I went and saw them, I thought, I don't care if they're real. I just knew they were part of Eleanor's story at that point, and I was remembering her. So I imagined a mother and a daughter at the end of World War II in the 1940s, right after the stones would have been dismissed as a hoax. And I thought, what if that was your family story? You know, what would you make of that? If somebody said, well, that's a crock, that's not real. Do you care if it's real or not? And who does that make you? So that's what this book is. It's Southern fiction, it's women's history, and it's a lot of imagination because we don't know what happened to the lost colony.
So, well, thank you for sharing that. And I'll have to say, when I volunteered to moderate this event, I knew Alayne and some of her books. I wasn't familiar with yours, but I'm so thankful that I got to read them, and I think you all will enjoy them. I definitely recommend you learning more about them this evening. But I was really fascinated by the fact that you all wove together facts and fiction in your book. And tell me why you were drawn to that genre of writing. And jump in wherever you'd like.
I'll try to make this brief. I started writing after I retired from teaching. I was writing my story of my life for my children. And when I came to an aunt in my family, Aunt Zena, a very mysterious lady who lived in Cuba and was married to a sugarcane plantation owner before Castro came to power. I was fascinated, and then I started researching. I found out so much about that period prior to Castro's coming to power and after he came to power. And it's amazing. People were put in my path that actually lived through those times. And so much research and so much talking to what we called in school primary sources. I fell in love with the research and writing historical fiction.
I always thought that my writing career, I'd started out writing historical romance, but I always thought that 2.0 would be me writing biographical historical fiction about unsung Black women who have not been talked about in history or have had their achievements recorded or, in Anne's case, erased. So that, was why I got into that particular genre. And right now we're in a bit of a renaissance of it, with several authors sort of taking up this cause in terms of restoring these women in some way back into the history books, at least for February and March, if not beyond that. So
It's like I hear that from both of you, the same things. It's something to do either connecting with your own life and your own family, and both, I think. And the idea of that, stories that are lost, and then voices that are lost, stories that have been silenced. And that is definitely true for this book. This was a complete accident. My first book was Southern literary fiction, not historical fiction. I can't do math to save my life. I can barely remember my phone number. And so, this was like not on purpose, but I got mad. Because when I went and saw that stone, I realized, this little 19-year-old girl comes across from England with her father. I don't think she had a lot of choice in the matter. Already hugely pregnant, newly married, and they lose her. They literally lose her. Her father goes back to England and never comes back, and she's gone. I don't think they looked for her too hard because she was very inconvenient. Truth. I mean, you don't lose a bunch of folks and then do it again, right? It didn't turn out well, so you kind of going to hush it up. And then when that stone is found in 1937, whether it's real or not, her story is sort of lost again and tossed in a storage room at Brenau University by a bunch of men. And so I got mad, and that's why I wrote a book.
Well, and I know, and when I read, your story about Anne Lowe, I was a little amazed, like, how have I not heard that story? And that's the thing, like you were saying, now it's wonderful that more and more of these stories are coming to the surface, and we all get to learn about them, and they're really amazing, so thank you for that. But so in terms of the research process, tell me a little bit, and we'll start with you this time, tell me a little bit about your process, and something maybe that either you learned that surprised you, or that amazed you, or like something that you stumbled on in your researching that made you say, aha.
Well, that would be what started the book, because I grew up in North Georgia. I know you can't tell listening to me talk. I grew up in Dalton, and my daddy, maybe this is part of the first question too, my dad was a big historian. He loved history, and he loved our family history, and we had these pictures on the wall. It was our family photograph in the middle, and then my mom's side on one side and my dad's side on the other, and they went back to tintypes, generations. And he would stand there and tell us stories about, this is so-and-so, and this is so-and-so, and she married him, and this is the idiot that disappeared, or this is the man that deserted in the Civil War, or, all the stories. So that intrigued me. And all our vacations, we went to everything that was a historical monument or a reenactment, or we were there in the 90-degree heat. So when I loved the story about the lost colony when I was a kid, and I was really precocious, but I think the reason was because it didn't have an answer, it didn't have an ending. I was really curious about that. So when I was digging around in some research for my first novel, I came across an article about the Dare Stones in Georgia. How do I not know anything about it? Had never heard of it. It just was nowhere in my knowledge. And that was like a light bulb. Oh, wait, there's a reason. Somebody's telling a fib here, I think. And I think that's the thing about my research. Anytime I come across something where you're like, hang on a second. Why is there a hole in this? What is that? It's curiosity.
Yeah. The thing that's difficult about reifying these unsung Black women is that at a certain point, the history's not recorded.
Nowhere.
I knew this was going to be the case with Anne Lowe because her having been born in 1898, she's a contemporary of my great-grandmother who grew over 2 counties over from Anne Lowe. And I knew that there were certain things about my paternal great-grandmother that I wouldn't be able to get, like her birth certificate or, certain aspects of her life. But I think that was one of the things that was serendipitous about coming across Anne Lowe as a subject, was because I had these Alabama connections and that I already sort of knew what her early years would look like. And so it was also fortunate that a textile scholar had been working on her life story for her biography, for her thesis. And so a lot of her master's thesis helped in terms of figuring out what were the factual tent poles, if you will, of Anne's life. The surprising thing of Anne's life being that she was a child bride at a very young age, 12. So having to come back in and imagine how that happens, what that was all about, and her escape, of course, which is a very crucial part of how she gets to be in the position to become this designer. But still, it's something that takes a lot of people by surprise. But then I've done a lot of these events and people will say my grandmother was 13 or she was 14 or whatever. This was a fact of the time that I couldn't gloss over, but it was surprising.
So there's a lot of stuff you filled in just with imagination.
Well, you mean in terms of her child bride time? Some, yeah, unfortunately was fact. And what was interesting is when I was not able to come across the family because you have a matrilineal line of descent in terms of Anne Lowe. But when I came across it, they said a lot of that was true. Yeah. So, yeah.
2 things. I mentioned my Aunt Zena, and that's why I started writing. There's a large Cuban thread in my books, and 2 things that really shocked me. I read in my early research, I read an article that was written about the Miami airport and a young girl standing alone with an envelope pinned to her shirt with her name. And she was a child of the Pedro Pan movement. I had never heard of this, and I was so totally amazed by the story. Parents were afraid that Castro was going to send their children to the Soviet Union and that they would lose control. And they started sending through a network formed by a private school teacher in Havana and a Catholic priest in Miami. They started sending their children out of Cuba to Miami, and over a 2-year period, 14,000 children were put alone on planes to fly into Miami. I was fascinated, and that's in my book, mentioned many times. And the other thing about Cuba, we didn't find out until about 5 years ago that a lifelong friend of ours was on one of the 2 ships at the Bay of Pigs, on deck, watching all the action. And the Bay of Pigs is in my second Alayne book, and I'm really excited. It ties in with the 6th grade and 11th grade curriculum. And my friend that was actually on the ship talked about how they ghosted out the ships so that there was no indication that they belonged to the United States. And all of their cameras, all that were taken up. And he actually received a medal that servicemen receive if they're in foreign wars, and he sent it to me. Should have brought it. But so those 2 things about Cuba were really surprising to me. I loved writing about those.
Well, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, but in terms of education also being an important theme in the books and then important to you individually and part of your career history, tell us a little bit about that and then why it is featured so much in your books as well.
I have to say, my mother was a teacher. My son's a teacher now. I'm a teacher. My mother was a teacher. My grandmother was a teacher, and my great-grandfather was a teacher. We're teachers. And I have to write about that and do a little teaching when I write, bad or good. As a matter of fact, in the back of my Alayne books, she's an aspiring broadcast journalist. So in the back of the books, there's a section called Alayne's Notebook. And there are lessons about how to write a feature story, how to write a hard news story, how to do interviews. All those things are in Alayne's Notebook so that you could read this and also learn about the career of broadcast journalism. But as far as including education in my books, my second book, Educating Sadie, is about is loosely based on my grandmother's life. And Sadie, well, let me back up. The main character is Amanda. She is a first-year teacher in 1892 in a small town. And on the night of open house, she meets this tall, willowy, blonde lady in a sackcloth dress and no shoes. And her name is Sadie. And she's there in the schoolroom because she wants to learn so badly. So the story is about how this first-year teacher takes this abused lady who's living in poverty and educates her. And in A Mystery Solved, A Prediction Fulfilled, one of the main characters is a soldier from the Civil War who starts teaching sharecroppers' children at the edge of a cotton field. And as more and more students come, he starts a school in the kitchen behind an old plantation house. And there's a lot about his teaching methods and that type of thing. So I have to have education. It's important in my books.
Well, her education is one of those things about Anne Lowe that we don't know. I mean, we just know that in her time period, a black child would be lucky to get the 8 years. And this is one of the things in terms of her issues with math that, that would figure out be very important to her later. She's running shops and trying to balance the books, and when that doesn't happen, and all of that other kind of stuff. So there was a certain deficiency in terms of her education with that. However, learning her craft, she learned as, again, more matrilineal descent, where her great-grandmother, her grandmother, and her mother were all seamstresses, and they all sewed for the ladies of the Alabama state legislature. It's her mother who's working on a commission for the incoming First Lady of Alabama when she dies. And Anne is 16 years old and has to take up the commission and finish it, which is one of the incidents that happen in the book. When she finally comes across a benefactor, she decides to go to school, and she goes to school in New York at a design school there. And it's one of the stories that's in the book. It's one of these things where education is a blessing, but it can also be a bit of a curse in terms of what happens to her in New York City, not in the South, in terms of when she's attempting to get her education at the design school, and they attempt to turn her away because she's black as a student, and how she works all of that out is really one of those things about Anne Lowe that repeatedly comes up in terms of her resilience and her determination to get to her goal. So, education more than one way, put it that way.
So education, I think it is, it's just part of my own experience, maybe, speaking through my characters, because I disappeared into the library at school. School library was the place, literally, sometimes my class would get back to the classroom, and the teacher would say, "Where's Kim?" And they'd go find me in the library, and I hadn't even noticed that they had left. So school was a big deal. It may be because I grew up in an old house that had no air conditioning, and so being at school was great. But for my characters, I think Eleanor, we just don't know a lot about her and her father, but you can, I think this is true, for all of our books to some extent. Women's history, you got to dig. You're not just going to find it in a book somewhere. It's not documented in the same ways. You're having to look for it in other sources. And education for Eleanor probably came mostly through her father. And I like to imagine what that would have been, because he was a religious man. He was a map maker. And I thought, if I can pull those two things together, and you've got this young girl who's being left a lot while dad's literally going to the new world, who knows if he'll come back, and she's in London, what would she have been doing? Maybe there's a printing press, The written word she would have known the power of that. So in terms of education for her, I was thinking about, you need to know to read. You need to know how to write. That would have given her some agency to leave that message. So that's where Eleanor and the idea of her education came from, but really it's coming out of my imagination and what I can make out of what I know is true in history for other women, because I don't know for her. And then for my characters in 1945, they're at the end of World War II. They don't necessarily know it's the end because they're living through it, but the world is changing for women. And it was fun to imagine for the 13-year-old daughter in the book, because she's just me. I mean, that's what happens. You show up in your characters, and I'm in all of them. And for me, that 13-year-old girl is easy to write. And the Girl Scouts were a big deal at that time. They're in Savannah. And I thought, you know, the Girl Scouts actually came out of a school called the Pope School that was in Savannah for girls, a private school. And then her interest in Brunel College, because it was a women's college, but they also had a boarding school for girls at the time. And so, you know, she and her mother live in Helen, Georgia at the time, just in the curve on the highway out in the middle of nowhere, because Helen was not Helen in the 1940s. It was a logging town. But she would have known about that school. And that's the way to do something if you're a precocious little girl, to make yourself something. She meets a young woman, when they are in Savannah, who is a Girl Scout, but she's grown and she's building Liberty ships, and she's going through a training to learn to fly. And she knows she's never going to really fly because they won't let girls pilot, but you can learn about it. And one day maybe. So that idea of education moving you into a position where you have agency, especially as a female that's a historical character, it just made sense to me because they're dreamers. Your characters are dreamers.
I love that. I've also worked in education for the last 20 years with Gwinnett County Public Schools, and so that's a theme that's close to my heart. And then in school, when the Scholastic book forms would come, that was my favorite day.
Gosh,
like, check, let me. I will bring all of those books, right? Those are the best days. That leads me to my next question about the female characters. And they are just so driven. And where do you think they find their strength or their inspiration from? And I'm thinking some of it is, again, your characters coming through from reality. But tell me about that.
I don't know. The strength of them is required, maybe, in the situations that they're in. They're not necessarily strong characters at the beginning. The main character in this book, her name is Alice. I did not like Alice. I did not like her until the end of the book. She was whiny. She was very, turned inward, and she's not formed. She's not grown up. And actually, it's true for the character in my first book, too. I felt the same way, and I kept thinking, why is anybody going to read this? I don't like you. But the daughter is strong. And I think the conclusion I came to by the end for all of my characters is the fact that where one of your characters is weak, somebody that they love makes them strong. Because it's required to love that person. And so I think that's what really happens for me with all of my characters, and in particular, mothers and daughters. You're required to figure yourself out and to find the strength to mother a child, even if it's not your child, right? So maybe that's what you're asking, I think.
Absolutely.
It's been pointed out to me from people who've read By Her Own Design about these groups or communities of women that happen across the book who almost lift Anne up and carry her to her dream, to her destination. So it's like, yeah, and I didn't plan that. It just happened that way. In terms of her story, it just made it clear that her mother and her grandmother as her first sewing circle, and then when she meets Josephine Lee, who becomes her benefactress and takes her and stakes her for her school and stakes her for her first shop, and then when she gets to New York, her sister who comes to live with her, etc. So it's these groups of women along the way. And I think, there's a certain aspect of maybe of pride in terms of, particularly for her mother and her grandmother. Sort of the backstory of her grandmother was that her grandfather came along and purchased the grandmother's freedom from her owners. because that's what she wanted, but her skill in terms of making the dresses was so great, they wanted them to stay close by so they didn't lose the opportunity for Grandma Georgia, as she was called, to continue to sew for them. So there's a certain kind of pride, I think, in terms of their craft and what they're able to do that Anne has as well.
Alayne Jones, I can't say that she was inspired by her mother, because in the opening of the first book, her mother has committed suicide because of something that she did that she can't live with. The person that really mothers Alayne is her aunt, Zia. Name is close to Zena, my Aunt Zena. Zia is, pardon me, a reporter for CBS News, and I really had to dig for that because, yes, they really did exist in 1959 when this book starts. That was very interesting to me. But Zia is the one that Alayne models her life after. She's very strong. And also, in the area where she grows up, there is a Revolutionary War soldier just out in the wild. And there's a motto on his grave, "Truth and Honor." And no one knows who he is, why he's there. That's part of the first book. But she and her aunt visit that grave, make up stories about who they think he was, and Alayne, takes that truth and honor mantra to heart. She is a very strong character. She's a wonderful role model for young women. I was asked if she was based on me, and I said, absolutely not. I'm a weenie compared to Alayne Jones, but they're strong women in my book that support other women.
So it reminds me, I had written this quote down and I was looking for it, but a John O'Donohue quote, "Blessed be those who have loved you into becoming who you were meant to be." And I feel like that is a theme that your women, your characters in your books all had someone in their lives that really believed in them and loved them. So in speaking of some of the women characters, let's talk about, Piper, let's start with you. You describe Anne beautifully as an artist. And why was that important for you to picture her as an artist?
Well, when you go to find her gowns, they're in museums. That's where they are, because of the craftsmanship that she put into the gowns. You know, supposedly, if you were a woman, you could come in and, all of the parts, the structure of the gowns in terms of the foundation, everything would be built into the gown. It's part of the garment in terms of the way in which she sought to create these one-of-a-kind, bespoke, individual to the wearer types of dresses. So yes, that was important to me. And it was also apparent to me in terms of her life. I, for my dissertation, wrote about women fiction writers and their autobiographies and how they created themselves as artists in their biographies as sort of a particular kind of story where you have that, if people know German, a Künstler in Roman, which is the life of the female artist and how it has a particular trajectory that of course is different from a male's life, in terms of the aspects of the career, education, and that potential love interest, how that would work out or not. in terms of a female artist story. So it's a bit of a theme that I've been studying for quite some time in terms of taking a look, because according to Tilly Olson, who wrote In Silences, only 1 of 12 women get this opportunity in which to express themselves artistically. And I noticed that even in terms of writing fiction, it's not a theme that's done a lot. So yes, it was important for me to characterize her that way and depict and structure the story that way as an artist. And her exhibit will be next year in Delaware, outside of Philadelphia. So the long-awaited, thing that Margaret Powell was trying to do before her life was tragically ended at the age of 38 was to get an exhibit. There'll be 40 gowns.
Wow. So where in Delaware?
Well, Delaware is like this big, but you know, outside of Philadelphia. I'm sorry. Yeah, the Winter Thur Museum. Okay, so Wilmington. Okay, thank you. In Wilmington. From September 9th, which will be the 70th wedding anniversary for Jack and Jackie, till the beginning of 2024. So and if you follow them on Instagram, winterthur.org, they've been showing what they've been doing in terms of reconstructing the gowns and recreating Jackie's gown, which is what the students are doing as part of that. But probably not as quick as Anne had to the second time, where there was the pipe that broke in her shop about a week out from the wedding, and she had to make the dresses again.
It's incredible. I mean, when you're reading that, I'm like, that's
the bridal
definitely like,
gown
how
and
is she
9
gonna
of the
do
bridesmaids, because of course the wedding had 800 at the church and 1,200 at the reception. So it was a huge coronation, is what I was gonna say. To have to do it over again is again another testimony of her resilience and strength that she was able to pull that off.
Absolutely. Well, and it's the floral embellishments, right, that were also a big part of it. So I can't wait to see the dresses.
Yeah, that's all. Her signature is always a flower signature in some way. It's like how she started out when she was 5 at her mother and grandmother's feet, picking up the scraps of the evening gown dresses and fashioning them into flowers. That always became her signature motif. But on Jackie's dress, for instance, you get this rosette kind of effect on the sides that are surrounded. People unkindly call them wagon wheels, but that is not what they were. They were rosettes in terms of structuring that flower signature into that dress, as well as the other famous creation with Olivia de Havilland when she won her first Oscar. She had a strapless blue dress, and the front from the bust to the floor is all painted, hand painted floral decoration. You can Google it or whatever. But when I realized it wasn't a stencil, that she hand painted that on there, I was astonished. She's like an artist, as I say. So.
Well, and then Kimberly, I was thinking about Penn, and you mentioned her earlier. She's such a strong character. So what do you think she will do with what she's learned about her past, and where she will go? Where do you think she'll go in the future?
Anywhere she wants. Penn is something. She's, that's the funny thing though. Sometimes when I think about that, what you think you want, what you think as a little girl you want to be, and what you imagine will make you independent and strong, and is often whatever the opposite is to what your mother did, right? It's often more in line with who your grandmother was. It's funny how we kind of skip a generation. You communicate better with your grandmother, you share more secrets with your grandmother, and it's almost like this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So it's like this as you move through the generations. So sometimes I wonder about that, if she won't end up a lot like her grandmother, a lot like Claire in the book, who is mentally ill, but she's beautiful and fanciful and wise in a lot of ways that Alice is not. Alice is very practical, and Penn is more fanciful and she's more of a risk taker. And so I just kind of wonder, will she be what her grandmother would have been had her grandmother been mentally healthy? And what will that lead her to? Maybe not necessarily flying an airplane, maybe going to school, and then maybe being a mother and being happy at it, whereas Alice is, terrified by it. So I don't know. And I think too, because Alice thinks she's a bad mother, but Penn tells you everything you need to know about the kind of mother Alice really is. And that makes me wonder, what is Alice really taught Penn, and what will her choices be because of that?
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. Well, and she gets into burnout, right? So she's got that.
So she has that opportunity, but she's deciding at the end of the book. So will she go away from home, or will she stay at this home that they finally have found? And it's a found family too, in this community that they have. So I love that everything is so open for her right in that moment. And it was on purpose, because I feel like where Eleanor was when everybody disappeared in her world, when she lost everything, she's on a precipice. What comes next? And at the end of World War II, those women and their daughters were sort of in the same place. What comes next? Who knows what the world is going to be like? And I feel like we're all in that place right now a little bit in history, and I'm looking at my daughter and thinking about that a lot.
Yeah, I love that. And then, so Alayne, how about Ellen? Now, will she and Jojo live happily ever after, or what do you see for her future? And then I want to revisit a little bit about the characters. Like, will you write the next chapter in these stories? Or we'll talk about that. But
Well, Ellen has a choice. She is, we're following Ellen from 1959, when she's a high school senior, to 1962. She's a junior in college. She has a young man that has proposed to her, and he wants to work in developing countries, and he wants her to travel with him. She is trying to decide where she wants to fit in the broadcasting world. She does not want to be on our Air Talent, although they make her, because she has to, as a student, she has to experience all facets of broadcast journalism. But she loves documentaries. That's her love. She wins a prize for a documentary on a Cuban man she met, who was an instructor of literature at the University of Havana, and is now in Miami as a janitor. And she won a Peabody Award for that. She loves documentaries. And maybe, yes, she can see herself following this young man all over the world, producing documentaries. I sort of brought part of her story to an end in this third book, and I could leave her there, but I don't think I can. I am so vested in all these characters. Like, she has an aunt that every time a conversation is concluded, the aunt says a Bible verse. Have you ever met someone like that? I mean, she's just a fascinating lady. And I don't know, I can't quite see giving up those characters.
Historical mysteries
But I have to decide where I'm going to take her. There is another young man that was introduced at the end of this book that I find very fascinating.
I saw that and I'm like, well, wait a minute, now where are we going? So you might have to bring the next one just to, because we're curious.
So
we're curious.
I just don't know, but Ellen Jones is a strong, amazing young lady, and I have no doubt that she's going to do great things.
Absolutely.
My book's too long.
Yeah. No, your book is great. Well, it is long, but it's great. No?
Everybody's like, we're done. Y'all need to go home.
Well, so speaking of that, I do want to leave some time for a few questions from the audience, but I have one last question for the panel here. And Kimberly, there's a line in your book that's referenced a few times, and it's, a story doesn't matter because it's true, but because it's been told. So tell me about what your thoughts are on all of that, all of you. And
I wrote it and I thought, that's awful. I can't really say that, right? Like, a story doesn't matter because it's true, but because it's been told, that's really irresponsible, is what I remember thinking. And then I didn't delete it because I thought, maybe because I don't know what it means, I need to think about that. And it comes from Claire, who is Alice's mother, who's mentally ill. She's very unreliable narrator, and I thought, so maybe it doesn't have to be true, right? And then the more I thought about it, I realized this whole book is about family stories. Family stories ain't ever true. But you want to know them, right? They help you know who you are. And in particular, stories that your mother tells you are sort of meted out. So they're kind of, she tells you what you need in the moment that you need it. So she's not going to tell you the same part of the story, maybe not the whole story, maybe not the true story. She might finesse it a little bit. And then sometimes you run out of time before you get all of it. And then you have to live with that. How do you live with that? I think that's what that quote is about. She's saying you need to share your stories. Your version of it needs to be shared with other people. People are going to have different perspectives. It's going to change. It's like a game of telephone, you know? But if we don't tell our stories, then we lose ourselves. We lose ourselves. That's all I got.
yeah, no, that's
Not
great.
that smart.
Thoughts on that?
Oh, in terms of the
Stories and the importance of sharing stories.
Oh my God.
Yeah, well, yeah, so it's kind of like biographical historical fiction, and there's the whole aspect of getting lambasted if you put something in that's not true, or like the separation between what's true and what's not.
You speculate.
Right, exactly. How can you connect those tent poles of the facts and the life and all of that? Like you were like suggesting, even with her like early years and the child marriage and how that happens and all of that other kind of stuff. So
Find women's stories, like she's talking about a family Bible. That's where you find, and in their recipes and their art.
right, yes, exactly. So yeah, it kind of depends on what it is, I think, in terms of that. It can vary.
It can be dangerous.
Yes.
Oh, it's all about the stories. My brother read my books and said that every time he turned a page, there was something out of our childhood, something that reminded him of something. And my books are based on stories that I remember that really had an impact on me. Horrible story. As a child, I probably shouldn't have heard this story. I overheard people talking. There was a man.
Those are the best ones.
There was a man that had a wife, and he went away, came back. They were poor farmers. He came back, brought another woman with him and her 2 children, and he went to work in the fields with the woman he brought with him, and his first wife had to stay and take care of the children. And I built an entire book around that because it's Sadie. It's where educating Sadie came from. I wanted that abused lady that had no education but really had, like I said, sounds cheesy, but she had a burning desire to learn. So from that story, I built Educating Sadie. There are all these little stories. Some of them are really funny that from my past that I built into my work. It's all about stories.
It builds truth then.
I used the stories as a springboard to developing other stories, but they all came out of my childhood.
Well, as soon as the train goes by, even before, if somebody, and if there are any questions in the audience that you'd like to ask the panelists.
Piper, I want to know what famous lady that we've never heard of you're going to write about next.
Well, I just turned in the manuscript 2 weeks ago yeah, I just finished that, what do we, like writers call it, like write instinct. Yeah, when you're in that write instinct and you're like trying to finish, and you only have time to take a shower, just finish, and you're like throwing sandwiches at your husband and son, just get out of my face. I don't like know anything like to say. There's turkey in the refrigerator and all those Thanksgiving leftovers. There's stuff for you to eat, just eat that and leave me alone so I can finish this book. No, American Daughters is about the secret interracial friendship between Alice Roosevelt, who's the daughter of Theodore Roosevelt, and Portia Washington, who's the daughter of Booker T. Washington. So, if you will, the white princess of America and the black princess of America. They were friends, and it's about their friendship and, you know, how they become, well, not good daughters, because you know what Theodore said about Alice is that I can either run the country or I can control Alice, but I cannot do both. Yeah. So and you know, the idea springs from that very famous dinner that John McCain referred to when he conceded the election in 2008 about when Theodore Roosevelt, having just gotten to be president because of the assassination with McKinley, invites Booker T. Washington to come have dinner, and the country just lost their minds about it. I just see them, these two fathers, kvetching about their eldest teenage daughters, driving them crazy. And so, yeah, they met a week after that and continued with this friendship that lasted until they were old ladies. The book ends about in the 1928, however, but yeah, that's what American Daughters is about, and probably will be out in early 2024.
Thank you for listening. My cousin is Booker T. Washington. Okay. I'm from West Virginia.
Oh, you're from, Malton and all of that. So excellent. Excellent, yes. I visited there, for research. So awesome. It's wonderful.
And maybe time for one more question, and then we'll do the raffle. All right, one last question. Yes?
I know you're probably all readers. As we end this year, what's the best book you read? What's your best read for the year?
I hate that question. I know too many authors, and they're like, why didn't you pick my book? I thought you said you liked my book.
It's like...
Seriously, Madeline Miller. I read it. I'll read it backwards. Just the language is beautiful. She just, from front to back. I'll just pick it up and open it up and read it.
But Kimberly, to be fair, I don't know that I can answer that with money.
It's so hard. And I don't know her, so I won't get in trouble.
Walker. We had gone on a family vacation to Richmond and we visited her house. Her house was there to see as a national historical landmark, etc. I was like, ooh, somebody should write this story one day, but I have just little kids, so I wasn't writing at that point in time. But yeah, Ruth did it, and it'll come out next year. So there's my commercial.
14 books in my head now.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Say.
So,
Alayne, do you want to share one?
That's terrible. I loved Ordinary Grace.
oh,
Ordinary Grace is good.
William Kent Kruger.
Yes.
He's my buddy. I
I saw
love
his
him.
interview, by the way,
Yes.
Denise. Oh my goodness, yes, Ordinary Grace. I have just checked A Light in August by William Faulkner out of the library, trying to,
You're trying to
yes, do something different, read something different. And I have asked for lessons in chemistry for Christmas.
Oh, it's so good. I could have said that one too.
Yeah, I could have too. Demon Copperhead. Barbara Kingsolver's
Not
new
yet
one.
read Demon Copperhead, but I read Lessons in Chemistry before it came out, and I was on Twitter with Bonnie, and I told her, I said, this is going to be big. I
Yeah.
said, are you ready?
Yeah.
This is going to be big. And she was going,
Yeah.
thank you, Barbara. I'm like, no, seriously.
It is.
So I was right to ask for that for Christmas. All right.
Well, one of my book club friends is in the audience, so I think we have to put that on our list, right? We'll have to do that, Gina. I got that. Okay, well, you all have been wonderful. Thank you so much. I know Marin wants to have a few announcements.
Few closing remarks. I don't know, with the books I learned about tonight being added to my books to read list, I'm going to be finished when I'm about 360 years old. Every time I come to one of these events, I'd like to thank our moderator and authors, Kalinda, Alayne, Piper, and Kimberly for sharing tonight with us and for sharing their wisdom and for talking to us about their writing. I'd also like to thank them for being educators. It's a noble profession. It's not for everybody. I appreciate the fact that you all four were educators, and you have continued to be educators in the writing you're doing. I learned a lot tonight. I'm sure a lot of us learned a lot tonight. I'd also like to take an opportunity to thank the library staff for setting these events up. I hope to see you. I hope to see you at more of them. They're a lot of fun, and like I said, I learned something every time I go to one. So thank you, Amy and Denise. Silent auction will remain open for a few moments. Like I said, I don't want to take the stuff home to my living room, and it does support the cost of events like this in the future. The authors are available to sign their books, and we appreciate Eagle Eye coming out. And thank you all very much for coming out tonight, and I hope to see you at another one in the future.